Chapel of Ease on St. Helena Island, now in ruins, was once a place of solace for the people of the island. Located amidst sprawling oak trees draped in Spanish moss, its crumbling walls and broken windows stood as a silent reminder of the past. It had been built in the early 1700s, a simple wooden structure meant to serve as a place of worship for the plantation owners and their slaves. But as time wore on, the chapel became a symbol of tragedy, haunted by stories that still linger to this day. The church had burned down several decades ago, but not before it had witnessed the unraveling of a community. Fires consumed not only the church, but also the lives of many people whose spirits remained tied to the place. Some said it was the wrath of a vengeful ghost, while others believed it was a curse born out of a tragic betrayal. One cool autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a couple of curious locals, Charlie and Emma, ventured out to the chapel. They had heard stories of strange occurrences, unexplained lights in the windows, whispers in the wind, and the sound of footsteps when no one was around. The chapel was a place many avoided, but Charlie, always the skeptic, was determined to uncover the truth. As they approached the ruins, the silence grew heavier, the air thick with a sense of something watching. The church's outline against the fading light seemed almost ethereal, as though it existed between worlds, neither fully in the past nor the present. Emma shivered, tugging her jacket tighter around her, while Charlie remained focused on the entrance. His camera was ready, eager to document whatever they might find. Inside, the air smelled faintly of decay, mixed with the earthy scent of moss. The floor was uneven, covered with bits of stone and scattered remnants of the once proud church. Tall columns, now leaning, reached toward the sky, while cracked stained glass windows filtered the moonlight into eerie, fractured patterns on the ground. "Nothing here," Charlie muttered, his voice echoing unnaturally in the hollow space. But Emma felt it, the unmistakable weight of something beyond the physical. A shiver ran down her spine as she glanced toward the altar, where the ruins were most intact. There, just at the edge of the shadows, she saw it, a faint, glowing figure. Charlie didn't notice at first, but Emma's eyes widened. She tugged on his sleeve, but when he turned to look, the figure had vanished. "Did you see that?" she whispered urgently. Charlie, brushing it off, scoffed. "It's just your imagination. There's nothing here." But even as he spoke, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A cold wind swept through the chapel, though no windows were open. Suddenly, a faint sound reached their ears. It was a low, mournful wail, coming from somewhere deep within the chapel. Emma's heart raced, and she stepped closer to Charlie. The sound was unlike anything she'd ever heard, a sorrowful cry that seemed to hang in the air, stretching out into the night. The wind picked up again, and for a moment, the silence was broken by the rustling of the trees outside. But then, all at once, the noise stopped. The chapel fell back into an oppressive quiet, but the air was thick with a tension that neither of them could explain. "Okay, maybe we should leave," Emma said, her voice shaky. She had heard stories of the ghost of a woman who had once lived on the plantation, who, after a terrible betrayal, had taken her own life in the chapel. Her spirit, they said, lingered, mourning her lost love. The cries they had heard now made sense to Emma. Charlie, still skeptical, moved toward the altar. He wanted to capture proof, to show that there was nothing to be afraid of. But as he stepped further into the ruins, the temperature dropped. His breath became visible in the air, a stark contrast to the warm night outside. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the chapel, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Emma froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned to Charlie, who had gone pale, his camera shaking in his hands. His eyes were wide, staring straight ahead. "There's someone else here," Charlie whispered. But when they both turned to look, the figure was gone. Without another word, they turned and ran toward the exit. As they did, Emma glanced back, and for just a fleeting moment, she saw it. A shadowy figure standing in the doorway of the altar. A woman, dressed in a long, flowing white gown, her face obscured by a veil. The figure remained motionless, her presence heavy with grief. The two ran faster, not daring to look back again. As they reached the safety of the road, the wind howled behind them, carrying with it the faint sound of a woman's cry. Back in the warmth of the town, Charlie was visibly shaken, his camera still in hand. Emma, though just as frightened, couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit of the Chapel of Ease had seen them, and in some way had been waiting for them. The ruins, long abandoned, were far from empty, and somewhere, deep in the shadows of that church, the ghostly figure of the weeping woman still mourned her lost love, her cries echoing through the centuries. Hampton Plantation, a once thriving estate nestled on the outskirts of Charleston, stood in solemn silence. Its grand structure was now crumbling, weathered by time and neglect. The mansion's towering oaks, draped in Spanish moss, swayed in the breeze, casting long, haunting shadows over the overgrown fields. But it was not just the plantation's physical decline that filled the air with unease. It was the sorrow that lingered within the old house, the sorrow of a woman known as the Weeping Lady. The tale of the Weeping Lady began long ago when the plantation was in its prime. Edward Hampton, a wealthy estate owner, fell deeply in love with Isabel, a beautiful young woman from a prominent family. She was radiant, her golden hair and pale blue eyes captivating everyone she met. Edward, eager to win her heart, showered her with affection, and soon they were engaged, promising to spend their lives together. However, Edward harbored a secret. A year before their wedding, he had begun an affair with Lydia, one of the plantation servants. The affair was passionate, but secretive, hidden from the world, especially Isabel. As their wedding day approached, Edward's guilt weighed on him, but he didn't reveal the truth. Isabel, trusting in their love, had no suspicion. But on the eve of their wedding, she discovered Edward's betrayal. Lydia was pregnant with his child. The heartbreak was unbearable. Isabel confronted Edward, but instead of apologizing, he became defensive, unable to undo the damage he had caused. Isabel's world shattered. In her grief, she pleaded for him to choose her, but he chose to stay with Lydia. Devastated, Isabel locked herself away in her room. Her sobs echoed through the house, but no one could console her. The following morning, her lifeless body was found at the bottom of the grand staircase. The tragic end to her love story was believed to be suicide, a desperate act brought on by heartbreak and betrayal. But Isabel's story did not end with her death. Soon after, strange occurrences began at Hampton Plantation. Servants and locals reported seeing the apparition of a woman, draped in a white gown, wandering the halls of the mansion. Her face was often hidden by a veil, but the unmistakable sound of her soft sobs filled the air. The mansion, once lively with the sounds of a bustling estate, now seemed haunted by the Weeping Lady's sorrow. Over time, the Weeping Lady became a local legend. People spoke of hearing her cries in the dead of night, coming from various rooms in the house. Some even claimed to feel a sudden wave of despair when they neared the old mansion, as though they could feel her grief in their bones. One night, a curious young couple, Samantha and Jason, ventured to the plantation, intrigued by the stories they had heard growing up. They wanted to experience the haunting firsthand. As they entered the house, the air grew thick with a strange energy, and every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified in the silence. As they ascended the grand staircase, the unmistakable sound of crying drifted down from above. It was faint but filled with sorrow. Samantha shuddered, but Jason, ever the skeptic, dismissed it as the house settling. Still, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt colder, and the cries grew louder. At the top of the stairs, they saw her. A figure of a woman in a white gown stood before them, her back turned. Her body shook with sobs, and a veil obscured her face. Samantha froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Jason's skeptical expression faltered as the figure turned toward them, revealing her face. It was Isabel. Her eyes were hollow, empty of life but full of sorrow. She gazed at the couple with a look of profound grief, and in that moment, they both felt the weight of her pain. Isabel raised her hand, as if reaching for them, but before they could react, she vanished. Terrified, the couple fled the mansion, never to return. But the legend of the weeping lady endured, her cries still echoing in the halls of Hampton Plantation, a reminder of a love lost, a heart broken, and a spirit that could never find peace. The mansion still stands today, its halls empty but for the lingering presence of Isabel's sorrow. At night, the cries of the weeping lady can still be heard, drifting through the ruins of the house, a mournful reminder of a love lost to betrayal and death.